Instead, we nurses were ordered to pack our musette bags with the warmest clothing we had and any first aid supplies in the event we were captured by the Germans, and to be ready to move out at 10 minutes notice. Typically female, the first item that went into those musette bags was a French perfume we had all purchased several months earlier in Paris. This was followed by our cigarette ration, because a pack of American cigarettes could go a long way for bartering in war-torn Europe. And we were scared. I especially, because of this H for Hebrew on my dog tags. You see, I'm wearing them. We were the very ones, the Hebrews, were the very ones that Hitler wanted to annihilate. Our patients were furious that American women were so far up front. And when orders came to evacuate our sickest bed patients that day, as we loaded them into trucks and ambulances, they begged us to change places with them. One of my patients was so concerned about my possible capture by the Germans that he constructed a blackjack for me to carry with me at all times, and believe me, I did. This was a 10-inch length of hosing stuffed with lead sinkers and suspended from my wrist by a leather thong. And his directions were, if a crowd gets near you, take this blackjack, slam it across his face, and aim for the eyes. Another patient gave me a spring blade knife, and his directions were, if a crowd approaches, plunge the knife blade into his belly, turn it, and run like hell. And I have a picture here. You can't see it, but in my right hand, I am holding the blackjack. It looks more like a flashlight in the picture. In my left pocket, you can see the outline of the spring blade knife. As we were evacuating our sickest bed patients that day, the fog that had fallen all over Belgium for the past week began lifting, and by nighttime it had completely dissipated and a full moon arose. This moon was so full and so bright it lit up our hospital area with an almost daytime light, and the painted red crosses on our tents were clearly outlined in this light. I was on night duty in my surgical shock tent when sometime before 8 o'clock I heard the sound of a plane overhead. I knew from the sound of the motor that it was a German plane. We had learned early on to distinguish the sound of their planes from our planes. And I stepped outside the tent to take a look, and I was greeted by the most beautiful sight of what seemed to be hundreds of red flares dropping through the nighttime sky. And I stood there momentarily mesmerized by this beautiful sight. But then the plane that had been dropping these flares began flying back and forth across our hospital tents and nearby enlisted men's tents, dropping anti-personnel bombs and strafing the tents. I ran back into my tent where my patients were already putting on their steel helmets, and told them to get under their beds. Fortunately, all my patients were ambulatory, as the sickest bed patients had been evacuated earlier that day. I found an empty bed and scrambled under it too, letting out a screech as I did so. My corps man, who was at the other end of the tent, called out anxiously, "Lieutenant, were you hit?" "No," I called back in a very disgusted voice, "only by a loaded duck." In hospital lingo, a loaded duck is a full urinal. My patients laughed wildly at this, and it helped dispel some of the fear and tension we had all felt a few minutes before. As this plane continued flying back and forth across the hospital tents and enlisted men's tents, dropping his explosives and strafing the tents, the anti-aircraft battery behind our hospital opened up and began shooting at this plane, but they kept missing it and instead we had flak coming through our tents that we surely didn't need. And eventually the plane used up all his explosives, and he steered off into the night. Many patients and hospital personnel were killed or wounded that night. 47 of our enlisted men were wounded, some very seriously, and 2 were killed outright. Our entire day crew came back on duty to work in the operating rooms and surgical tents or wherever needed throughout the night and well into the next day, which was Christmas Day, when the sun was out for the first time in over a week. The buzz bombs were also out on their 12 to 15-minute visits, as they had been during the fog-bound week. But our planes were out for the first time in over a week. And so were the German planes, and we watched as they engaged our planes in dogfights near our hospital area as spent machine gun bullets fell around us. We saw flaming planes spiraling to the ground as we silently prayed that they were German planes and not ours. Chapel tent was overflowing that day as people spent more time in ducking than they did in praying. Christmas week was a nightmare, with German planes coming over every night to drop their paratroopers. We called them Bed Check Charlie. And their paratroopers were dressed in American uniforms, and they spoke a perfect English with no trace of German accent. And they were going to infiltrate every American base. One subject that they had not been taught, besides American slang, which they knew very well, but they had not been taught anything about American sports. And when they were challenged by guards as they attempted to infiltrate a base, they couldn't answer such questions as who won the World Series or who's the pitcher for the Dodgers or the Yankees. Another question that could usually nab them was, what size shoe do you wear? And if they replied size 44, we knew we had them. As Christmas week drew to a close, more of our planes were seen in the sky, and soon they outnumbered the German planes. The next 2 weeks we saw huge, constant waves of our planes by day, thousands and thousands of them, and those of the Royal Air Force at night. And it was the most heartwarming sight and sound in the world to see them and to hear them. Thousands of Germans were surrendering, thousands more were captured, and we felt that the tides of war were turning in our favor. As our ground troops advanced into Germany, they mopped up pockets of resistance and destroyed German buzz bomb nests. By January 25th, the Battle of the Bulge was officially over. In this 6-week period, 19,000 Americans had been killed, 47,000 wounded, and about 21,000 missing in action or taken as prisoners of war. 53 of our hospital staff received Purple Hearts, 3 of them Purple Hearts with oak leaf clusters for having been injured on more than one occasion. Caring for G.I. Joe, the American soldier, was truly a privilege and one of the greatest experiences of my lifetime.
Wow.
What an amazing story.